So once again, welcome to the Unshakable Foundation meeting of Cocaine Anonymous. This is a main share meeting, and today it's with great pleasure and lots of gratitude that we welcome Adam T, who's come to share on the topic of the spiritual life is not a theory, you have to live it, for up to about 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for the Q&A portion of the meeting. So with that, Adam, it's over to you. Thank you so much.
My name is Adam. I'm a cocaine addict. Can you guys hear me? Want to thank the group. Thank you for inviting me to talk. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate in Cocaine Anonymous. Ultimately, it's a responsibility to give back what was so freely given to me. Welcome to people that are new. You know, we call January the CA tryouts. If you're trying Cocaine Anonymous again, if you don't want to be here today, if you don't think this will work for you. I didn't get to recovery because I had a bad weekend. I had a couple of bad decades. And for me, like a lot of us, this becomes a matter of life and death. I live in Southern California. We have hundreds of meetings. A lot of people know CA started here. I stood up in Cocaine Anonymous as a newcomer for 17 years. I had so many chips and key tags. I could have played poker with them. I remember one secretary saying, give them back. And I did that walk of shame over and over and over again. And looking back at that experience now, I thank God for the unconditional love of the old timers. A lot of the old timers that aren't with us anymore in CA, a lot of those guys came from AA. Some of them died with 30, 40 years clean and sober. And they would say things to me like, don't even bother taking chips. Just sit in the back. Shut up. But in a loving way, right? But they made it really clear to me, and if you're new, I hope you hear this. They made it really clear to me that if and when I was ready, because somehow they could see it. They could see it by my demeanor, my lack of interest, my fidgety nature. They had the wisdom and the experience from years of recovery, just by my attitude, to see that maybe it wasn't right now. But they were so kind and they were so gracious and welcoming to me. And they made it really clear to me, again, if you're new, I hope you hear this, that if and when I was ready, that the doors of Cocaine Anonymous would always be open to a drug addict like me. And I think looking back at that experience now, if you're new, next to my parents, Cocaine Anonymous is the closest thing to unconditional love that a drug addict like me will ever experience. No matter how many people I burned, how many lives I destroyed, how many cars I wrecked, how many jobs I lost, how many hearts I broke, how many despicable, disgusting things I did. And if you are an addict like me, it's the most, disgraceful thing in the world to be the family junkie, especially if you have a large family like I do, where, my mom had 3 sisters and a brother. My dad had 3 brothers and a sister, and a lot of them are from the UK. And she told them everything. One more rubber room, one more overdose, one more robbery, one more car accident. Happy birthday, Dad. I'm in jail. Does anybody here relate to being paid not to come home on the holidays? They would pay me. They knew I was going to steal all the relatives' car. I would take all the gifts from under the Christmas tree and return them for a refund so I could get high. This was absolutely awful. It was just horrible. And I look back at it now. I wasn't able to see it from the perspective of Co-Anon or Al-Anon. In other words, like most addicts, for the first decade of my recovery, I was unable to see the destruction that I created. And the mantra is always the same: I'm only hurting myself. But to look at it through those eyes now, I was a straight A student. I was atop of all my classes. I was a first-generation American. I was an only child. My mom and dad were married over 50 years. And to watch those two people, to literally watch those people watch me burn my life to the ground, to the point where eventually my mother had sold the family property. She moved and she didn't leave a forwarding address. That's where I left her. And despite all of that, the doors of Cocaine Anonymous has always been open to addicts like me. If I lived to be 100 years old, I could never pay CA back for the love and kindness that, some of you people have shown me, not all. I mean, I hate to say this, but if you like everybody in Cocaine Anonymous, you know what it means? It means you're probably not going to enough meetings. My sponsor said, you don't have to like anyone in particular here, but if you go through the 12 steps and then the traditions of Cocaine Anonymous, you'll learn to love people here you don't even like. People that are sarcastic, people that are difficult, people that are condescending, people that gossip. I mean, we all know that CA is not the hotbed of mental health. And again, I'm not being condescending. But what's so interesting after 26 and a half years clean, when I see, and if I've learned anything in all these years, it's compassion for my fellow man. It's also learning how to not take things personally. Because when I see that condescending, sarcastic, mean person at a liquor store pissing in his pants trying to get another dollar for a hit, my heart still breaks for him. It still breaks for him. There's something very unique about this, that what we do here, the dirtiest word in Cocaine Anonymous is help. A lot of us have difficulty asking for it. Even at 20, 30 years clean, we can't ask for help. But I had to understand that high price we pay for this almost low quality of life. I've learned to love people in Cocaine Anonymous that I didn't even like. And what happened to me eventually is I started coming to meetings loaded. The interesting thing about Cocaine Anonymous 2024, 2025, which it is now, if you actually see a person high in a CA meeting where I live, people say things like, oh my gosh, what's he doing here? I mean, as ironic as it is, we don't see a lot of addicts using in the rooms, and I don't want to bash the therapeutic community, but for me, treatment would swoop me up in my most desperate moments, right? Throw me into yoga class. I'm doing the downward dog, right? Checking out my needle marks. I mean, craft hour. It's so funny. I'm making belt buckles and bongs, right? Nature walks. I'm walking to 7-Eleven, getting a big cup, filling it up with liquor, put a little Coca-Cola on top, walking back into the group, doing some of my best sharing. And then I started going through institutions. And it's funny, we have a chapter in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the chapter to wives. Anybody read the chapter to wives? I never read it. I never had a wife. Not of my very own, right? I just stir it up a little bit. But the chapter to wives is very instructive because it talks about 4 types. Type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. And it really, if you're new, describes the progression of addiction. Fun with problems, just problems. We describe it also as magic, medicine, misery. But the last type of addict or alcoholic described in the chapter to wives is the type of addict that's been placed in one institution after another. Sound familiar? The type of addict that typically uses on his way home from the hospital. And in the 17 years that I recycled through Cocaine Anonymous in some of the largest CA meetings in the world, I still became that 4th type. By the time I finally got clean in Cocaine Anonymous, I'd gone through residential treatment for drug addiction 28 times. Not 28 days like the movie. This isn't Hollywood. 28 times. And I was wearing that like some kind of badge of honor. I thought that's what made me an addict. And I remember telling my late sponsor I'd gone through treatment 28 times. I was hoping that would get rid of the guy, loser. I mean, one of those overzealous sponsors chasing me around with a big book. I didn't want to ruin his batting average. And I told him I went through treatment 28 times, and he starts laughing hysterically, and he says to me, that doesn't make you an addict. And I thought, you're kidding? He says, oh, no, that just means you paid $500,000 for a big book. And I didn't think that was funny. And I'm not going to start citing and quoting pages tonight out of the big book. But page 101 of the big book says any scheme that attempts to shield the alcoholic or addict from temptation is doomed to failure. See, treatment was a great place to fatten me up for another run. Treatment has its rightful place in recovery. Even Bill Wilson had gone through treatment. If you listen to Dr. Silkworth, he says we favor hospitalization or treatment for the alcoholic or addict that's still jittery. Some people don't go through treatment. If you ever wonder what all the treatment centers and religions have in common, it's obvious. They all send their addicts to us. Right? Treatment probably saved my life. But if you're new tonight, my experience is that treatment never solved the problem. And as an addict, like a lot of us, I always thought the problem was cocaine. I thought it was drugs. And I remember someone in Cocaine Anonymous saying to me, Adam, if drugs are your problem, that pipe, that bindle, that balloon, that syringe, if that's your problem, you're probably not an addict. And then in the very next breath, he said to me, and if you are in fact an addict, the type that's described in the doctor's opinion in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, your problem isn't narcotics. And I thought, what? I mean, it went right over my head. It was like some kind of cruel riddle. I remember using over that for years. But what happened to me, and you'll hear that statement a lot in the rooms, what happened? What happened to me is I got around a group of big book enthusiasts, people in Cocaine Anonymous that took the statements in the big book, turned them into questions, and directed the questions to me. Very simple ideas, like was I incapable of being honest with myself? Did I, in fact, use because I like the effect produced by cocaine? Well, duh, that's a no-brainer. How about this if you're new? Was I restless, irritable, and discontent by nature? Was that my natural state before I ever got loaded? And the last piece, was my greatest obsession that somehow, someday I would control and enjoy my using at the same time? And did I pursue that illusion to the gates of insanity and death? And if you're like me, what happened is for the first time I saw the truth. And the most obvious truth, what we call the external unmanageability, was crystal clear. From the time I was in middle school, I was in 8th grade, I was already pissing in my pants. I was already drooling on my desk. I was already passed out under the bleachers. I overshot the mark from the first time I used drugs. My nickname in 8th grade was Space Cadet. I couldn't find homeroom, right? People were picking high schools. I was already picking rehabs. But if you're new tonight, the disease of addiction comes in people. It doesn't come in pipes or balloons or syringes or bottles or six-packs or pills. The disease of addiction comes in people. And the greater aspect of this spiritual illness, as Bill Wilson describes it, centering in my mind, if going through the considerations in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous shows me anything at all, it shows me that an addict of my type, an addict of this type, cannot really live without drugs, not successfully, not happily. And part of what it really means for me to suffer from the disease of addiction is that I have this mind that will continue to take me back to getting loaded. Every time I get released from an emergency room, a hospital, a fancy Malibu treatment center, men's central jail, 5743, roll it up. It's amazing to me. I've been incarcerated more times than I can count. And I'm sitting in county jail in my cell, casually reading a novel, not a cloud on the horizon. And I hear that release number, 5743, roll it up. And suddenly there's this visceral compulsion in me to use that is so powerful. There is nothing on God's earth that's going to get between me and that bag of dope. There is nothing that's going to stop me. Does anybody not relate to this? And I come to Cocaine Anonymous and people say things to me like, oh, well, don't use no matter what. And I'm like, what? I'm a literate person. I've read the book. I'm like, what happened to the top of page 24 where it says verbatim, every addict passes through the state where even the strongest desire is of absolutely no avail. It says my willpower will become virtually non-existent. This idea that it talks about it, and it's like having a car with no brakes. I'll be crystal clear on this. I got a car outside. It's got no brakes. If I take that car out of gear, what's going to happen? It's going to hit an emergency room. It's going to hit a treatment center. It's going to hit a police car. All the therapy, all the psychiatry, all the trauma work, all the medication will never, ever put brakes in that car. We're talking about loss of control, loss of choice, and loss of power. 3 different things. Some people have lost control, okay? But they haven't lost choice. They can still choose not to use. To them, Cocaine Anonymous is the Sober Elks Club, and they have the power not to use. They don't have the control, so they don't want to use again. They want to hang out with people like me that don't use also because it's a safe place for them. But what it really means to be an addict of my type that have this mind that will continue to take me back to getting loaded. Right? I have to understand what they're saying here. Loss of control is the physical component. Loss of choice is mental. But the power, the inability, and what happens to addicts like me is I stop using, the outsides get better, the insides get worse. In fact, they get so horrible when I'm not using. My own mother says to me, for God's sake, son, get loaded. You were nicer. You're tearing apart my house. So what I have is something very, very different. And when I'm not getting loaded, if I do not understand that piece, and what Dr. Silkworth says is so powerful, he says, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, he says, once this psychic change has occurred, this very same addict who seemed absolutely doomed, I lived in institutions for 17 years. My mother actually, I remember her saying, I wish he would hurry up and die. At least he'd be out of his misery. Do you know what it takes for a mother of an only child to be driven to that point where she actually wishes for her own son's death? And the doctor's opinion says, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, he says, once a psychic change has occurred, this person like me who seemed absolutely doomed is easily able to control their desire to use cocaine or drugs. What a powerful thing that is. When we talk about a psychic change, a spiritual awakening, you tell people there's no evidence-based results for Cocaine Anonymous or these other 12-step programs. Go to one of these world conventions, see thousands and thousands of people converging on a random city every several years. It looks like the United Nations, every continent, every country, every city, every township is represented. And for every one of those people, if you're new, that has made the effort, note the word effort, you will see a daughter, a son, a mother, a father, an uncle, and aunt. You'll see a world of people. Harvard and Stanford, which probably mean nothing to people in Europe, but those are two of our top universities. Both did studies on the efficacy of the 12 steps. They both said the same thing. The 12-step program results exceeded all the other modalities combined. That's their thing. It's on the United States Library of Congress, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, as one of the top 88 books that shaped America. It has affected the lives of somewhere between 30 to 40 million people worldwide. And you know why I don't think it's going to work for me? Because it wasn't my idea. And this is the foundation of what we're talking about today. And I start to understand what this is. What do I suffer from? I have a mind, if you're like me, that will continue to take me back to getting loaded. It's almost like my default program, a mode in which I always go back to using. And I have the privilege. I live in Santa Monica, which also used to be called Little England because we got a lot of Brits here. And we also call it Silicon Beach because we got about 250 tech companies that have taken over this area. And I've had the privilege of sponsoring a lot of really smart guys that program computers, they design apps, they speak foreign languages like Python and Java. And, in a modern world, I start to understand these ideas. We talk about the language that Bill Wilson uses in 1939 and how really advanced it was for that time period, because we use the word program today all the time. It was not common vernacular in 1939, but if you look at the language, one of the definitions of the word program, if you look it up in the dictionary, is a sequential set of instructions, just like the 12 steps, right? Designed to do what? Designed to bring about a result. Now listen to the parallel language. What do you do when you get a corrupt file in a computer? Well, it's obvious. You install a recovery disk. And pay attention, the function of that disk is to restore that program to an earlier point in the process, the second step, the original self, the self that's not corrupted by fear, not corrupted by selfishness, not corrupted by the inner narrative, the dishonesty, the faulty emotional attachment, which is resentment. See, it never occurred to me that 10 and 11 actually become like a viral scan. We talk about entering the world of the spirit. The spiritual life is not a theory. 10 and 11 show me how to become mindful. They show me how to become accountable. They show me how to become transparent. They show me how to become responsible. They show me where I paint the red flags green how to navigate around the drama, how to match calamity with serenity, how to stay in fit spiritual condition. If I follow these ideas, if you're going to eat crow, wouldn't you want to do it while it's still warm? How can promptly, quickly, immediately, and at once mean at the end of the day? I mean, pay attention to the language if you're new, right? It's asking me at the end of the day to bookend my day. When I retire at night, I'm going to become mindful. I'm going to review my day. If I didn't catch it in 10, where was I selfish? What does selfishness mean? It means I can do whatever I want and not pay the consequences. It means I can make decisions based on self that leave me in a position to be hurt and still play the victim, right? It means that the rules don't apply to me. What is dishonesty? The lies I tell myself. What is resentment? This attachment. What is fear? My faulty relationship with God based on self-reliance. If I'm not aware of it, if I haven't done the specific instructions in 4 through 7, it's like the features of an automobile: power steering, power windows, power brakes, cruise control, climate control. 10 and 11 are like doing it on the racing track at 180 kilometers an hour. How quickly can I be rid of it? How quickly can I gain effectiveness and understanding? How quickly can I become really spiritually centered? I mean, this is a magnificent way of life. In fact, if you really look at where all this came from, and you go to Bedford Hills or go to steppingstones.org and look at the archives where all the books were written, and look at the books prior to 1939 when the book was published, you will see all the books: comparative theology, personal psychology, all the different books that were contributed to this piece of literature. It's absolutely amazing. If you look at contemplative prayer, petitionary prayer, centering prayer, all the things that we do just in the 11th step, these instructions, every single of these words means something. I start to look at these ideas. When I retire at night, I do the review. Upon awakening, I ask these very specific questions. The word ask is used 6 times here. Each of those is a prayer. The way the book is assembled: prayers, promises, warnings, and directions. I go through it in 4 colored highlighters. I turn all the statements into questions. I use this book later as a tool to help others. It is a design for living. It never really occurred to me, if you're new, when Bill Wilson talks about principles before personalities, it was our founder's future hope that these instructions, these guidelines, again, were more significant than the opinions in the rooms. And I love the fellowship of Cocaine Anonymous. I love hanging out, going out for tea after the meeting, and the weddings and the birthdays. But in the 2nd chapter is a very, very specific thing. It says the fellowship is but one element in the powerful cement that binds us. And there's a very strict warning there. It said it would have never held us together as we are now joined. If you're like me, the fellowship gives me enthusiasm. It gives me inspiration. It gives me encouragement. It gives me hope, brotherly love. Some people are actually finding relationships and employment here. But if you unleash a character like me into a large group of people without guiding principles, my character defects thrive. I actually get sicker in the fellowship. And what happens is, consciously or subconsciously, I will become more separate, more different, and more alone. And if you haven't heard that terminology, if you're new, it means separated from God, different than every single person here. We call that terminal uniqueness, if you haven't heard that term. And alone. You know that loneliness, that ache in the heart of every one of us that has nothing to do with the proximity or closeness of other people? That loneliness. In fact, my own birthday, my own wedding, I still feel alone. The bigger the crowd, the more alone I am. If you have that like I do, what that is my inability to connect. And you put a couple of drinks and a bag of cocaine in me, I'm calling people from 5th grade saying, I love you. I go right into immense, get me high, and all of a sudden I'm at one with the universe. I'm standing on the roof of my building, howling at the moon. Right? Couple more hits, couple more drinks, I'm okay with me. Get me good and loaded, I lose interest in selfish things and suddenly gain interest in my fellows. That's why every time I take a hit, I want to go somewhere, right? It takes me away from self. It creates the illusion that my life is manageable. Even alcohol, it's classified by the AMA as a depressant. 9 out of 10 people, they have a couple drinks and they say, oh, I got to slow down, I'm feeling it. I have a couple drinks and honey, I want to get married. I'm trying to find the car keys I hid for myself before the 1st grade. a couple of drinks with me. We're going to Vegas tonight, right? Give me a little cocaine. I want to start a business with you. Give me a little opiates, right? I want to clean the house. See, alcohol or drugs produces the illusion that my life is manageable. It does something for me that overshadows everything it's doing to me. And that's what the Earth people and the Al-Anons and the Koanons don't understand about us. They can't figure out why we get high. We can't figure out why you don't. And I thought for years, because I use, therefore my life's unmanageable. And that's like looking at the tip of an iceberg and showing the ruined marriage, the broken home, the financial destitution, the failing health, and thinking that's the problem. In fact, that's what treatment told me the problem was. That's why I was sitting in another fancy treatment center in my nightgown, learning about my triggers, and I remember saying to the counselor, honey, waking up's a trigger for me. I'm awake. And the counselor's like, will you please go back to your dorm, sir, and button up your nightgown? And you know what Cocaine Anonymous is telling me? That the trigger is actually on the inside. Completely different way to look at it. You ever notice when an addict's not having a good day? It's when I'm not getting my way. Oh, come on. We're all like 5-year-old kids here with old people's faces. You don't believe it? Cross one of us. I'll resent you for decades and your grandchildren. But if you're new, resentment in Latin means to refeel. It means consciously or subconsciously, I've taken an event from my past, I've attached emotion to it, and then I refeel it, I recreate it, I replay it, I re-engage in it. My life becomes like spiritual Groundhog Day. And again, what he says is unless I can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of my recovery. This is the power piece. This is the last piece. That's why he says, if and when we straighten out spiritually, only then will we straighten out mentally and physically. I have to understand what this means. If you're new, because right next to being separate, different, and alone, there are 3 fundamental pillars of recovery. The first is to be protected by some kind of God. The second, to be accepted by self. And the third, to be connected to a community. Einstein said, I would rather live my life pretending there's a God and finding out there isn't than live my life pretending there's no God and finding out there is. This is called Pascal's wager. You can look this up on your phone after the meeting. But this idea, if you go to the ocean with a cup, you get a cup full of water. Imagine going to the ocean with your whole life. Take all of me, God. Take my will. Take my life. Guide me. Take my resentment, take my fear, take my relationship, take my old ideas. We do a set-aside prayer. God, help me set aside everything I think I know about you, about myself, about Cocaine Anonymous, about others, so I can have a new experience, to be completely and absolutely open to a new way of life. And I had to see this. This was the bedevilment piece, where I was taken through page 52 and I was asked these very specific questions. You might want to ask them to yourself now. When I'm not using, am I still a prey to misery and depression? Yes or no? When I'm not using, am I still having difficulty controlling my emotional nature? Yes or no? When I'm not using, am I still having difficulty with my personal relationship? Yes or no? When I'm not using, am I still full of fear? Yes or no? When I'm not using, am I still basically unhappy? And I was affirmative in all those areas. And my sponsor said to me, with all your wisdom, all your education, all your experience, are you able to solve this problem on your own? And I was cornered. Suddenly I realized I lacked the power to do that. 30 pages later, you will look at the parallel ideas in the promises. For each bedevilment on page 52, you will see a parallel promise. All the work is in those 30 pages right there. So that was the first piece. And you hear it in a vision for you. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God, 1 through 3. Admit your faults to him and your fellows, 4 through 7. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Surrender, catharsis, restitution, and the last piece is service. These are fundamental spiritual ideas. I had a lot of math in school. I had physics. I had calculus. I understood inertia, velocity, centrifugal force. If you're new, no one argues about the laws of physics. No one argues about gravity. And here's the question. Why wouldn't there be spiritual laws? Why wouldn't there be some fundamental ideas that if I applied them to my life would just work better? It's all I have to see. That is the piece that I started to become open-minded to. I didn't mean that I had to understand God, but I had to come to believe in a power other than myself. It asked me to stop playing God because I have to see through these actions that the God idea works. My ideas in this area didn't. And that was enough for me to make a beginning. That was enough for me to launch out on a process. You tell a 5-year-old kid, go in your room and straighten out your room. The child doesn't want to do it. You tell that same young person, go in your room, throw out all your old stuff. We'll buy you brand new stuff. How long would that take? A minute? They asked Michelangelo, how did you make the statue of David? He said, oh, I never made the statue of David. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David, and there he was. What a powerful idea. So you hear it. We ask for his care and protection with complete abandon. Think about it if you're new. If I abandon the ship, I can't climb back on. This abandonment, this idea is a third step decision to do the righting. The third step without action is fantasy. That is my belief, and that is my experience. That third step means, it says step 3 has little lasting effect. This is the exact wording, unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of. It doesn't say face and cope with, face and endure, face and go to talk therapy over. It says be rid of. To be rid of the things in me that are blocking me. And for me, what I had to do is I had to take the rear view mirror off my car, metaphorically, and throw it out the window. I revisited, I went back and I looked at my relationships with resentment. I revisited, and it asked me to look at it from an entirely different angle. It says we realized that the people were in the world were quite wrong. And that's as far as we ever got. It's asking me to reframe it. I can't see the picture because I'm in the frame. And this idea, this very fundamental idea that when I became willing to take actions in Cocaine Anonymous that I did not yet believe in, after 28 treatment centers, after being a newcomer for 17 years, after going through generations of suicide, mental illness, and alcoholism, I got free. Alcoholism, like addiction, is the only prison where the key's inside. So the first piece, to be protected by God. The second piece, to be accepted by self. That's steps 4 through 7. What that means, if you're new, is I no longer need internal or external validation. I develop what's called an internal locus of control. Look it up on your phone after the meeting. It's a clinical term. And the third piece, to be connected to a community. Protected by God, accepted by self, connected to a community. And I go from being the weakest link, and I'm talking about, again, generations. My mom's brother committed suicide drunk. My father's brother committed suicide drunk. And to be, like we say, some of this dysfunction goes 14 generations. Generations. World War II, World War I, all the way back. And I couldn't see it. Would it be possible that I could actually heal that in one sitting in an inventory if I was thorough? Absolutely. I couldn't believe it. My sponsor stood in front of me and he said, Adam, how free do you want to be? He said, you want to be free enough to just survive this? So when people say, how you doing? You can say, I'm hanging in there. He goes, I'll buy you a drink just to put you out of your misery. Or he said, do you want to be free enough to chase your dreams? Free enough to have relationships that work? Free enough to navigate around the drama? Free enough to match calamity with serenity, free enough to stay in spiritual condition. And I was for some reason, I was just broken enough. I was just broken enough to do 100% what he asked me to do. That meant to go to meetings every single day, to come to meetings half an hour early, to help setting up meetings, to do an inventory, to do a fifth step, and then immediately start working with other people, to sit with a new person, read them the doctor's opinion, explain the phenomenon of craving, explain the spiritual condition, explain these things as I went through the book. Like Bill's story, take World War I, take the stock market, take golf, Take gender out of the story. Ask these questions. Did I use like Bill? Did I feel like Bill? Did I think like Bill? Was I as hopeless as Bill? Look at his grandiosity, his emotional immaturity, his sensitivity, his omnipotence, which was his fight against God. And then look at the things that I was unwilling to do in the second half of Bill's story. All these things are diagnostic tools. Every one of these has a reason. I've come to believe in this because I've done it for so long with so many people that I've seen it work. It doesn't matter who's wrong. I'll tell you right now, it doesn't matter who's right. It matters who's left. And when I get around people with 10, 20, 30 years clean that, again, have amazing lives, that came from places like I do. I lived in institutions for 17 years. I've been on medication, psych med, since I was 9 years old. I was completely and absolutely out of my mind because every time I had a thought, I took an action. Have a thought, take an action. Have a thought, take an action. I had played God in my life. And what we're asking people to do here is to superimpose some very simple principles. I look back at that third piece, connected to a community. It is said that the disease of addiction, if you're new, is the only disease when treated that will actually leave the sufferer in a better position than if they never had the disease. I'd have never believed it. I would have never believed it. And I look back at 17 years of failure, again, in one of the largest conglomerates of Cocaine Anonymous in the world. And what I see is my defiance towards spiritual principles. The original manuscript in the big book said, rarely have we seen a person fail that's thoroughly followed our directions. Now, if you're like me, I don't like directions, right? I don't like being told not to do something I already don't want to do. Sound familiar? I will argue with anybody about anything at any time. You tell me it's black, I'll tell you it's white. You tell me it's big, I'll tell you it's small. You tell me to go left, I'll go right with an attitude. That's why we say denial is an acronym. It stands for don't even notice I am lying. Think about it. You could tell an addict, you can't tell them much. You don't believe it? Try sponsoring somebody. And what that means is you can lead me into the gates of hell, but you can't push me into heaven. And when we talk about attraction rather than promotion in the 11th tradition, what that really meant to an addict like me is eventually I'm going to come back to Cocaine Anonymous on my own terms. Not because Sober Living wants me to, not because my parole officer wants me to, not because family services thinks it's a good idea. Where I live on the west side, they all get clean for the trust fund. They're coming into meetings in limousines. But see, if you're like me, hope doesn't matter to an addict like me until I'm hopeless. You think hope matters to me when I got £1 million left in the bank, brand new Ferrari, boat down in the marina? You wouldn't catch me dead in a Cocaine Anonymous meeting. And my experience, if you're new, is God didn't matter to me until my back was against the wall. And what happened to me, and this isn't, you probably don't have a lot of guns over there, but I got shot in a little argument. It went right through me. And I'm laying on this gurney, and I've got the paramedics over me with the little paddles. And you know what's so funny? All I know is God. If you've ever been confronted with your mortality, right, there's only two things people cry for, mommy and God. Right? I mean, have you ever been dope sick? Anybody here? I was on methadone maintenance for 10 years. You dope sick every morning with your head in the toilet, puking your guts out. Who prays more than addicts like us? Come on. You either relate or you don't. But I remember it's a very interesting thing because Bill Wilson, page 13, 14, he has this powerful white light experience. And on the very next page, it says it was quickly blotted out by worldly clamors, most of which were where within himself. So I'm sitting in this doctor's office in the emergency room. He's a cardiologist, and I'd never been closer to God in my life. I'd seen my entire life pass. He put it what a tampon, if you know what a tampon is, right through me. That's the way they deal with gunshot wounds. And I'm sitting there, and all I wanted to do was tell my mom how much I loved her. I mean, I was closer to God than I'd ever been. I thought it was over. I saw my whole life had flashed before my eyes in about 30 seconds, right? So he does what's called an angiogram, and he runs his cord through my groin, and he pumps his dye through my heart on the TV screen, and he looks at me, and he smiles, and he says, oh, the bullet missed. You're going to be fine. And I went from, God, I will do anything you ask. And in the very next thought was, I need to get out of this hospital before law enforcement shows up, and where's my pipe? how quick it is. That's how quick I go to God. I will do anything and everything you ask me to do. Complete spiritual obedience to taking my will back. That's why if you're new, there's a huge difference between the act of surrender that gets addicts into Cocaine Anonymous over and over and over and over again, and the state of surrender that's keeping the old timers here. It's a completely different concept. It's like watching a swan glide across the water. So beautiful, so effortless, so graceful. The bird's doing something very simple under the water. He's paddling like hell. If you're new, we have a chapter in the book, Into Action. Be very careful with this. There's no chapter into feeling. There's no chapter into thinking. Although those may be important, and it says later, my thought life will be placed on a higher plane when it's cleared of wrong motive. These actions become critical. I'm hearing music. I think that means my time's up. All right, I'll finish with this last thing. I was at an airport recently. I'm standing at this airport, and this guy comes running up to me, and he says to me, you don't remember me, do you? And he was wearing a Slingshot T-shirt, full body tattoo, and he very aggressive. And I said, I don't remember you. And I thought he was going to ask me for money. And he had these two little girls with him and this beautiful lady by his side. And this is what he said to me. He said, 15 years ago, you spoke on a prison panel, and something you said changed my life. He said, these are my beautiful daughters. This is my amazing wife. We want to thank you. And all of a sudden, the wife starts crying. Then the little girls are crying. Now I'm crying. A minute ago, I didn't know whether to run or call security. Now we look like the long-lost family from the old country. And my head's getting big. I'm starting to think I'm the Dalai Lama. So I call my sponsor. My sponsor's like, Adam, you've got a big mouth and a good memory. Don't let it go to your head. And he hung up on me. But there's two dates in a human being's life, the day we're born and the day we find out why. All my life, I thought it was about money, property, and prestige. But I guarantee you this, if you have what I have, vomit smells the same in a Land Rover. It does. How do I maintain and develop a posture of gratitude? How do I develop this condition? Part of the word spiritual is ritual. We've entered the world of the spirit. We've exited the world of self. I'm going to close with that. Thank you very much.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Hi, guys. I'm Ella and I'm an addict. Thanks, Isaac, for taking the meeting. So, Adam, amazing share. So the question I've got for you is, how have your prayer and meditation practices evolved over the years that you've been in recovery? I guess it's two questions in one, really. And the last bit is, and what do they look like today? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm a very, you can tell I'm a fast thinker, right? So, people are different in that area. My sponsor said you can meditate for 4 hours a day. There's only one problem with that. You're of no use to God whatsoever. Okay, what I'm looking for in 11 is how to be useful. See, addicts need to be useful more than they'll ever need to be loved. There's three kinds of prayer in 11. There's centering prayer, there's petitionary prayer, and there's contemplative prayer. The 5 areas, right? Instinct is the body, inspiration is the spirit, intuition is the mind. All of it is insight. I'm slowly evolving and growing, but I'm praying for knowledge of God's will for me. I'm very clear on what God's will is for me. Okay? He doesn't care whether I'm a stockbroker or a plumber. It's how can I be kind? How can I be helpful? How can I be supportive? Look at the third step prayer. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, right? How can I be useful? So my prayer has pretty much stayed very simple. It's contemplating my day, contemplating the future and the past. It's centering me so I can listen and talk to God, right? And it's also asking for forgiveness, asking to be divorced from self-centeredness, from self-will. So I'm very simple. I mean, come on. As sophisticated as we think we really are, all I'm doing is I'm centering myself and I'm quietening my mind. My sponsor said, what do you want from CAI? I said, I want a yacht and a Learjet. And this is what he said. If you do steps 4 through 9 and you live in 10, 11, and 12, what you'll get, because I'm a taker, he said, what you'll get is a quiet mind and a loving heart. Okay? The instructions in steps 10 and 11 are crystal clear. The promises are crystal clear on what that will is. So I mean, I read other books and stuff, but this is what we're talking about today. So it pretty much stayed within the parameters of what the big book says. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella, for your question. Before we move on to Michael, there's a question in the chat from Ran. And the question is, Adam, you mentioned 4 different colours for categories in the big book. What were the 4 categories?
Prayers, promises, warnings, and direction. I mean, my whole book, I can't really lift it up, but it's all like that. I've got my whole book like that. The whole book is that. I mean, and then when you go through it laterally, you see all the warnings, you see all the prayers, you see all the directions. Then you go, oh my God, this really is a textbook. The warnings are amazing. It's like and then the inventory is the same way. When I did the extended 3rd and 4th column, it's like you look sideways at my fear, my resentment, my selfishness, the pride, the anger, the greed, all that. You really start to see who and what you are.
Great. Thanks, Adam, and thank you, Ran, for your question. Next, we have Michael. Would you like to come in?
Yeah. Hi, Michael, Addict. Thanks, Isaac, for service and everyone else who's been a service. And thank you, Adam, for your share. It's a 2-part question. So after 17 years and 28 treatment centers, what was like the turning point where you didn't want to be a newcomer for 18 years and go into a 29th treatment center? And then further on, like you're full of passion and enthusiasm 26 years down the line. Has it always been like that? And how do you keep that up? And I'll leave it there.
Yeah. First of all, the catalyst is surrender. See, I became willing to take actions I did not believe in. I did everything they asked me to do. The last time I came out of treatment, I was willing to go to 2. I sat for the first 5 years in 2 meetings a day. I got a sponsor. I worked the steps immediately. I was working with new people. Within 90 days, I was working with people, taking them through the book. It was that quick with me. I'd been in the rooms playing victim for 17 years. This completely and radically. His selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of the problem. The solution is servant-centeredness, other-centeredness, and God-centeredness. The word enthusiasm means filled with the Spirit of God. That's the second part. The Oxford group felt there were 4 things that blocked a person from God. 1, a luxury I will not forgo. 2, a secret I will not confess. 3, a restitution I will not make. 4, someone or something I cannot forgive. The luxuries I will not forgo, those are selfishness. Secrets I will not confess, dishonesty. Resentment, right? Someone or something I cannot forgive. And fear, a restitution I will not make. These are the things I'm looking for in 4. These are the things I'm watching for in 11. These are the things I'm reviewing in 10 and 11. So once I'm rid of those things, what happens is suddenly I have peace and power and purpose. If restless, irritable, and discontent is the problem, which is irritability or the fault-finding mind, the restlessness of the body and the discontentment of the spirit, then peace is step 10, power is step 11, 12 is purpose. They remedy those 3 ideas. You cannot fail if you do what we're suggesting here. I believed him. I believed him. That's all I can tell you is I believed him. I did it. And you know what? The psychiatrists were chasing me around for the first 10 years saying, what medication are you on? You're doing so well. I said, I'm on the 12 antidepressants on the wall. What happened to me, bro? How can I live like that for years? All that suicide, all that violence, all that homelessness, all that destitution, and then have this kind of life because I became willing to take actions I did not believe in. And now to look at people, they're going to fight me on every term in the book, and they're going to not meet me at meetings, and they won't do the steps, right? There's a direct relationship between willingness and surrender. You'll never see anybody more willing than the guy that comes off a long, hard run. He'll do anything. But 30, 60, 80, 90 days later, he's like, you mean we got to go to meetings every day? And all of a sudden, his will takes over. The function of the mind is to think. The function of the body is to act. The function of the human spirit is will. My will always choose me. If I can align that will with principle, that is the beginning of change. And the beginning of AA, it was almost 100% successful. Now we're the last point of contact. When 25 years ago, they used to had a thing called a phone book. You go in the phone book, AA, and 12 steps are right at the top of the list. Now you have to dig through 40 pages on Google of treatment centers just to find Cocaine Anonymous. And if you do find it, it's after you've gone through all these institutions. You're so broken by the time you get here with therapy that this doesn't work. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Michael, for your question. Next, we have Cami. Would you like to come in with your question?
I'm Cami, and I'm an alcoholic. And thank you so much, Adam, for that awesome lead. I mean, I was over here just writing stuff down because you were just dropping so many gems. But I wrote down, and I think you said that fear was a relationship with God based on self-reliance. And I want to know if I wrote that down correctly, and if so, if you could just to give a little bit more on that.
Yeah, all fear is agnosticism. Once you go through we agnostics, I think with the right kind of like I had someone take me through it. It's a faulty relationship with God based on self-reliance. It says we commence to outgrow fear. What I did when I went through the inventory, we do what's called an extended third and fourth column. I'll give you an example. If I resent my employer for exploiting me, esteem is I'm the greatest worker he has. Pride is others should see what a hard worker I am. Security is I want to be treated fairly in the workplace. Ambition is I want a fair day's wage for a fair day's pay. Fear of being exploited, fear of being ripped off, fear of being abused, fear of being disrespected, fear of being broke, fear of not having enough money. When I take that list of fears and I list them vertically on a piece of paper, the big book asks me on page 67 why I have the fear. It says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed me? So if I fear being exploited, why? Because people that are exploited are disrespected. Why do I fear being disrespected? Because people that are disrespected are weak. Why do I fear being weak? Because people that are weak are alone. Why do I fear being alone? Because it's painful. Why do I fear being in pain? Because I don't want to use again. Why do I fear using again? Because of fear of the unknown, fear of everything goes back to I don't trust that God's got my back. That's what it is. And if I look back at my history like that home footprints, every time I crawled out of an overdose or a wrecked car, there was something there. I believe that maybe I just have the gift of faith, but I started to break away the things in me that were blocking me from God through this process. And I started to develop a belief and then a trust and then a reliance. And what happened through that is I built a foundation. Part of that was me going through the inventory. So that is how the mechanics of the fear inventory. I do a lot of these workshops. This is something that had to be in place for me to start trusting and relying. And once I did that, I'll tell you are we out of time? Okay, real quick story. There's two explorers and they're going across this lake of ice and they have to cross this lake or they're going to die. And one of the explorers is like Indiana Jones. He's playing his guitar and he's stomping on the ice. And the other guy's really timid. He's terribly scared. Every step he takes across this lake of ice, he's so fearful. So these two explorers across this mile-long lake of ice. In the very middle of the lake, they both fall in and drown. Guess what the moral of the story is? One guy had a great day. See, the lake of ice represents our lives. The falling through the ice represents the certainty that we will all meet our end. But see, how I deal with fear, how I walk through my life, I commence to outgrow fear. It's like if I asked you and you knew you were going to live to be 95 years old and die in your lover's arms, you'd go skydiving, you'd buy a motorcycle, you'd live your life like you were going to die tomorrow. And that's the beauty of this. This is what we talk about, entering the world of the spirit. I did the work. I got what the big book said. I got free.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your question. Lastly, and very quickly, we have Young. Would you like to come
Yeah,
in?
I'll be really quick. Thank you so much, Ida. Hi, everyone. My name's Young. Very grateful. Recovered addict. Adam, thank you so much. And also, thanks for coming tonight. But also, when I first came in, before there was any Zoom meetings, and I was just kind of walking over town, 3 meetings a day, desperate, and I heard a tape of you. And what came to mind at that moment was that bit in the book. If you want what these guys have got, and I thought I want what this guy has, and I'm going to be willing to go to any lengths to get it, because I didn't understand half the stuff that you were saying, but I could feel it, and I thought I want that. And do you know what? Something amazing's happened to me as well. So I'm so grateful to you. Quick question. What's your favorite chapter out of the big book and why? Thank you, Adam.
It's got to be six. I mean, I live in six. You know, six is entering the world of the spirit. Once I've cleared away the wreckage of my past, it shows me how to take everything that I've learned up to that point and start apply it to my life. So 10 again is the mind, it's peace. 11, this centering prayer, this petitionary prayer where I get clear, and then 12 is purpose. I mean, I love working with others, but the setup for this is actually in chapter 6. It's from page 83 till the end of the chapter, 88. It's fantastic. I can't do it just by reading it. I had to do the work up to that point. And that was the thing that radically changed the way that I engaged in my life. I'll tell you, Young, you know, what you said, maybe when I die, at least I wish my mom knew that I made a little bit of a difference. I think I got to spend 10 years with her, but, you know, I always thought that she thought I was a loser, you know, and I'm so grateful that I've got to help at least a couple people. Just maybe a couple people before I die. Thank you, sir.